Welcome to Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now you can learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property. Learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau with the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denisi, and Corker. He's a member of the Committee on Professional Ethics of the Bar Association of Nassau County and counsel to the Nassau Academy of Law. And now, here is your host for Law You Should Know, attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Law You Should Know, and your host, Ken Landau. Today we're going to be talking with a lawyer who left the legal field and made her journey into another career. And her journey is going from lawyer to pastry chef. And you'll learn about how she made the transition and how her legal education helped her in her new occupation. And my guest is Paula Hoyer, who's also known as the Kosher Baker. She's an author of several books, including The Holiday Kosher Baker, The Kosher Baker, The New Passover Menu, and The Healthy Jewish Kitchen. Paula, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Thank you very much. Happy to be speaking with you tonight.
Let's go back a little bit and talk about why you became a lawyer.
Well, my entire childhood, all I ever wanted to do was to become a doctor. And I went to college at Brandeis University pre-med. And one day, I had a terrible accident in the chemistry lab where everything went wrong, and my hands turned yellow, and I spilled some things and decided it was a sign from above that was not my destiny. And I loved to write, I loved public speaking, and I loved politics. So I switched my major, and instead of medical school, ended up in law school in Washington, D.C. after college.
And when you graduated from law school, what type of legal environment and what areas of law did you practice?
So I ended up joining a law firm in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. that was about small to mid-size at the time, and I ended up doing environmental and insurance litigation.
And how did you find doing that early in your legal career?
I ended up in that practice area because the nicest people at my law firm were working in that area. I started working on the insurance cases first, but as a result of working on the insurance claims for underlying Superfund cases, I knew more about the environmental cases than anybody else. So I ended up working on those cases as well. And it was interesting at the time. I was very lucky as a young associate to work for senior associates who had young children and did not want to travel so much. So as a second and third year associate, I was traveling around the United States, representing Fortune 500 companies and going to meetings and doing depositions all over the United States.
And it was taking too much of a toll on your family life.
Well, I was a young married couple at the time, and my husband was working for the U.S. government. So I worked long hours, he worked long hours, so it worked for that period of my life. And
what did you do next in your career?
So my husband, Andy, who is also a lawyer, was working for the U.S. Trade Representative's office, and they sent him to Geneva, Switzerland, to serve as the legal advisor to the U.S. mission to the World Trade Organization. And I went along with him, and a friend of mine helped me find a job as a legal advisor for an organization called UN Watch, which dealt with the treatment of Israel at the United Nations. So I was essentially a speechwriter at the time.
And what did you do next, and what finally led you to become a chef?
Well, I worked in this legal job in Geneva for about 2 years, and then I gave birth to my first child, my daughter, Emily. And when I came back to work, my boss wasn't so supportive of time I had to take off to manage my daughter and the nanny, and it was just difficult. So after several months, I decided to stop working, and immediately I enrolled in cooking school in Paris because I was living in Europe, and it was something I had always wanted to do.
And when you took the cooking school, was it more did you have an idea that you would use that in another career, or just it was a way of just relaxing
Not
and
at
recovering
all.
from the law?
When I left the job in Geneva, my plan was still to return to the U.S. within a year or two and maybe work in the government as a lawyer for a while and then go back to a private law firm eventually. I really wasn't looking for a new career. My thinking was only I had loved to bake my entire life. My grandmother in Brooklyn, who was my great inspiration, was a wonderful baker. But, growing up in Long Island, I didn't feel that career choices, were so vast and varied like they are today when we look at our children and we guide them and we try to help them match what their natural talents are and what kind of professions are out there. I remember feeling like that my choices were doctor, lawyer, accountant, teacher, something like that. So nobody ever said to me I could become a chef as a profession.
And why did you pick why did you pick that particular cooking school?
I picked that school because I didn't have to go nonstop for 10 months. I could do each course a week at a time. So I could do a course in dough, a course in petit fours, a course in chocolate, a course in breads, and spread that out over several months in order to fulfill the degree. Because I had my daughter with me, it was much easier to do that.
And I guess that your daughter could be a taste subject for your cooking.
Well, she was 15 months old at the time, and she ended up being in the 95th percentile for weight because she would eat everything that I prepared and brought home. I would walk into my friend's apartment in Paris with somewhere between 6 and 8 cake boxes of desserts we had learned to make that day. And that was after giving at least 2 boxes to the homeless guys who would hang out in front of the cooking school in Paris and my cab driver, and I still had so much left over. So she was quite rotund at the time from all the desserts. It was really extraordinary how much we prepared on a daily basis.
And what then led you to start your own business or work in a totally different field after your pastry training?
So I would come back to Geneva, Switzerland, where I was working in between my courses, and friends would ask me to bake things for them, just, for fun. They were having a dinner party, and they would say, could you make me a lemon tart or a pear tart or a chocolate layer cake? So I did. And somebody at that dinner would then call me the next week and said, could you please make one for me? I have a party the following week. So kind of by accident, I ended up with a catering business because people insisted on paying me. And at one point, I was filling as many as 7 orders a week of decorated cakes, French desserts, a lot of dairy-free baking for the kosher community in Geneva. So I ended up with a catering business, kind of by accident.
And was that the beginning of your start as a pastry chef?
Yeah, that was. At one point during my time in Geneva, a woman I had met in the Jewish community had asked me to teach a cooking class for a charity. And I didn't, I thought, okay, I've never really taught before, but why not? And so I started teaching cooking classes for them in French, which was somewhat more comedy sometimes than instruction. But I was teaching how to make Jewish desserts and American cookies and cakes. And that started my long love of teaching cooking. So when I moved back to the United States, and at that point I had 2 kids with me, I had done some research about catering from home in Washington and found the laws didn't really support doing that. So I decided to start teaching cooking classes in my home as a flexible option with 2 small kids at home. It ended up being a really good choice because 2.5 years later, I gave birth to twins, and having the flexibility to teach when I could and not teach nonstop was wonderful. And what I had done was I had taken all the recipes that I learned in Paris and converted them to like American measurements, and a lot of them I made dairy-free for the kosher community, and that's what I started doing, was teaching cooking classes in my home.
Did you also do things to promote yourself, like put some videos on YouTube with different baking or cooking techniques?
So we're talking about 1997 at this point.
Okay.
So we're talking before any of that. It was basically email marketing and word of mouth is how I built up my business. And I wasn't even doing too much freelance writing. The freelance writing came a couple of years after that. I did get hired to edit cookbooks for another cookbook author, and that was something that I really was qualified for because, as you know, the legal training is so precise for writing. So I approach recipe writing similar to the same way I would write a brief. I had to use the least amount of words as possible, but be the most specific so that what I had to convey was as clear as possible, and people could follow the recipes. So I was a really good cookbook editor because of that. And
as you branched out to do these different things, did you find you had to review legal documents for your new different aspects of work?
Absolutely. So it was really interesting because I think the first kind of legal contract I had to deal with was probably with my first publisher for my first cookbook. I had signed some simple agreements for editing, but I hadn't done a formal contract until I wrote my first cookbook. And one of the things that really stuck with me from my time of practicing law is that, like, as a lawyer, we have our areas of expertise, and we're not experts at everything. So I already knew, like, if this was not an area of law that I was not an expert in, I was going to find the person that was. Now, I could easily have reviewed these contracts, but I went to somebody who routinely reviews contracts with agents, contracts with publishers, contracts in the entertainment industry. And this friend of mine from college is still my lawyer and helps me with all of my contracts, mostly because this is what he does all the time. So when I've had to deal with licensing my logo, licensing my image, having my logo on videos, he's able to help me in a way that I wouldn't know because I don't have that experience. I can always pull up draft contracts online and look at them, but I would rather hire somebody who knows that area of law better than I do.
And while you were doing all this, were you still doing your catering?
I didn't do catering much when I came back to the United States. I really went into teaching. So first I was teaching classes in my home, and then I started teaching classes locally for different Jewish organizations. And that slowly expanded as people in other cities would hear about me, or they got my first cookbook and they wanted to meet me, and I started getting hired to do cooking classes all around the United States.
And did you also do book signings and have a book tour?
Yes. So the book tour was often doing cooking demonstrations, which I still do all the time. And sometimes it's a talk and a book signing. I would do lots of Jewish book festival talks around the United States as a really great way to get known in, outside of big cities. And I still continue to do that. This winter alone, I think I was in probably 6 cities I had never been to in Ohio and Texas and other places that have smaller Jewish communities, but people who are still really interested in eating healthy food and getting great recipes.
And has your audience expanded beyond the Jewish community to others looking for healthy cooking?
Oh, absolutely. My first cookbook was a whole book of 160 dairy-free recipes, The Kosher Baker. So many friends of mine who were not Jewish, or friends who were not even kosher but lactose intolerant, jumped on this book because all the recipes were dairy-free, and it was a very comprehensive book. And from there, I moved on to doing a lot of gluten-free baking and gluten-free recipes. And then after the 2 dessert books, I moved into food. So my food recipes are all very healthy, natural ingredients, and easy. And, I remember when I was practicing law, how little time I had to prepare meals. And it's something that has still stuck with me because I try very hard when I'm writing recipes to put myself in the shoes of the person in the kitchen who doesn't have all day to cook, who probably works and has a family as well. I try to make sure that the home chef doesn't have to clean up so many pots and pans. The home chef can find the ingredients easily and not have to go to more than one store to find them. Busy lawyers have to eat too, and I try to make my recipes as easy as possible and as accessible to as many people as possible. Okay. So multiple food allergies, different skill levels as well.
Okay, we have to take a short break now. After the break, we'll return to our discussion with Paula Hoyer about her journey from lawyer to pastry chef. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC and also over the internet at nccradio.org. If you missed any portion of the show, you can find the podcast by searching WHPC on iTunes or on Spreaker.com. That's SPREAKER.com.